going to talk all about preparedness as a biblical lifestyle and as a biblical value. And I'm also going to share 5 practical ways that you can start prepping, as it said, today. You're going to want to stay tuned to the very end because I'm going to share briefly 4 specific areas I focus on as a homemaker in preparedness. And I have videos from you showing different ways that you are living a prepared lifestyle too. So this is going to be such a fun video. It is going to be kind of long. I will have detailed timestamps in the description box if you want to hop around, and I will also be releasing this video into shorter segments every day until the whole video is out there for those of you who prefer the shorter content. So without further introduction, I'm so excited. Let's get discussing preparedness. Now, usually one of the very first questions that people want to know is, did you grow up this way? Did you grow up gardening and taking care of animals and doing some of the basic skills like canning and making butter and making broth? And the answer is no, I did not grow up this way. But I'm going to give credit where credit is due and say that I think my dad had probably had dreams of self-sufficiency and homesteading and living a more prepared lifestyle probably before I was even born. And he definitely upheld this lifestyle as an ideal for our family to work toward. He dabbled a little bit. At times we had a garden, at times we had a donkey and some bees and some chickens. And we would go to like these preparedness fairs and self-sufficiency type fairs where they would show you how to make your own butter or how to spin wool. So it was definitely something that my dad talked about a lot. He had Mother Earth News magazines lying around everywhere. So I was definitely exposed to preparedness and homesteading as a child, but my parents didn't really consistently make a concerted whole family effort toward living this lifestyle while I was still at home. After I moved out and after I was married, then my family did actually start living this type of lifestyle as well. But I didn't grow up this way and I didn't learn skills growing up for this type of lifestyle. Now, when I was still at home, up until I was 12 and a half years old, we lived in Louisiana. And of course, my dad, being excited and interested in preparedness and self-sufficiency, talked about it a lot. And he and my mom met a lot of resistance in this area, especially from pastors and church members in Louisiana. But then when we moved to Texas, it was the exact opposite story, where the pastor of the church we were attending actually taught about preparedness from the pulpit. So which one is it? Is preparedness a biblical value or is it not? And you guys already know that I am 100% persuaded that preparedness is a biblical lifestyle. It is a biblical value. And here's why. For 3 main reasons. Number 1, preparedness shows our faith in God. Number 2, preparedness is an act of humility on our part. And number 3, preparedness is an act of wisdom. So number 1, by living a lifestyle of preparedness, we are actually showing our faith in God and in His Word, that He is true and that His Word is true. And that when He says in Matthew chapter 24, that in the last days, perilous times will come, that there will be famine, that there will be plagues and wars and earthquakes, that we take Him at His Word. We believe Him at His Word and we act just like Noah did. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 7 says, by faith Noah, being warned of God of things not yet seen, moved with fear, preparing an ark to the saving of his household. So I'm sure Noah couldn't see exactly how this flood was going to happen because it had not yet ever rained on the earth, and it was many years before God actually did send the flood. But because he believed God's words, because he had faith in God and that His Word is true, he went ahead for all those years and built that ark with not a drop of rain coming from the sky. He acted in faith. He believed in faith that there was going to be a flood because God had said it, and so it must be. Preparedness is an act of faith. And so us, very similarly, we don't know how everything's going to unfold. We don't know what the last days are going to look like, what the timeline's going to be, and how this whole thing is going to work out in the last days and as evil waxes more and more in our world. But to hear Yeshua explain some of the things that are going to happen in the last days, if we believe in Him, if we believe His words, what can we do but act? Yeshua's words should change the way that we live our lives. That's what this whole channel is about God's Word changing our lives, affecting our lives. Everything that I do is because God is in all and through all in my life. So yes, we should be praying more. We should be diligent in prayer, ladies. And we should be reading his word, studying his word, hiding his word in our heart through memorization. We need to be abiding in Messiah and having him abide in us to make us strong and to spiritually prepare us for the hard trials and the hard seasons that are ahead. But guys, Noah did not prepare a spiritual ark. He prepared a physical ark because a physical flood was coming. We live in a physical world. We have flesh and blood. We have stomachs that need to be fed, children that will die of starvation if they do not have food and water. We have physical needs. That's how God made us. This is how God has made us. And so if we believe that physical things like famine are coming, physical things like plagues, physical earthquakes, physical wars are happening, then, and we believe God and we believe his words, then we should have physical preparations as well. Preparedness is an act of faith, and it's saying, God, you said these things will happen. I believe your word, and so I'm acting on your word. Now, secondly, preparedness, living a lifestyle of preparedness, is an act of humility, because hardship is not beneath any one of us. Any of us can struggle financially or lose a job. Any of us can have an unexpected bill come up or make a really stupid financial decision. I think we have all done that before. And even though the term self-sufficiency is connected with preparedness, preparedness is actually realizing how insufficient we are as an individual. We rely on whole communities and whole systems working together for our world to function as it does. For there to be food on my table, many people are involved in this process. Preparedness is a recognition of our dependency. It's recognizing and acknowledging our limitations, and that natural disasters are no respecter of persons. Hardships, hard seasons are no respecter of persons. They happen to all of us. And then even more so, preparedness in our modern society recognizes how we have largely lost and failed to pass down the knowledge and skills for even our most basic needs and necessities. As a society, we've just grown haughty and entitled, thinking we just throw some money at whatever it is and get what we want. But instead, the scriptures teach us in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 23 through 24, be diligent to know the state of your flocks and look well to your herds, for riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation? And then the passage goes on to say, you're going to be able to gather in the herbs from the hills, you'll have goats for your milk, you'll have lambs for your clothing, enough for you and for your whole household. In other words, be diligent with your preparations, because riches will not last forever. Times of hardship do and they will come. The last 80 years have been relatively comfortable for our nation in the United States of America. But historically, and still for the majority of the world, being able to take care of your most basic necessities is critical. If we're humble, we'll recognize this and we'll live a lifestyle preparedness as an expression of that humility. My third point is that by living a lifestyle of preparedness, we show our wisdom as women who build our houses and look well to the ways of our household. As ladies, we have a particularly active role and responsibility in preparing our households, because we're the primary managers of our homes. We're the ones who are most knowledgeable about all the moving parts and all the workings of the home. And the Proverbs 31 woman was definitely a woman who lived a lifestyle of preparedness. In verse 25, it says that the prepared Proverbs 31 woman laughs without fear for the future. And why is she not afraid? If you back up in verse 21, the scripture says she is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in double garments. The capable woman of Proverbs 31 stewarded her time well. When it was still summer and fall, she was preparing warm garments ahead of winter for her whole household. And now that winter is coming and now that it's here, she can laugh and she can be at ease, because her family has been prepared for and is taken care of and is warm this winter because of her preparations that she did ahead of time. When we are diligent and steward our time and our resources well, when we look ahead and we anticipate our family's needs, we act wisely as women. On this channel, we have talked about being a godly woman, and one of the attributes of a godly woman is to be sober-minded, according to Titus chapter 2. And so to be sober-minded, instead of turning a blind eye to all the events that are happening in the world, a sober-minded woman is going to understand the times that she's living in, and she's going to respond appropriately to what she sees. We need to have our eyes open. We see the inflation that's happening at the grocery store when we fill up our carts. And so now we need to respond appropriately. We need to have our eyes open to the different political events that are happening in our world. We need to think about how that will or could affect our families and our households and the functioning of our households. And then we need to respond appropriately. When we hear about food shortages and then we see it happening in certain parts of our country, or maybe even in our own grocery stores with certain products, we as sober-minded women should be acting on what we see. As ladies of our homes, we have to have our heads on straight and be thinking clearly and be acting wisely for the saving of our households, for our children, for our families, for the functioning of our households to go well. We must be sober-minded women. Our husbands, our children, our households depend on us being strong and being capable women. Our children may not understand why you need to buy or sew coats in the fall time because it's not winter yet. But you know what they don't know, and so that's why you're making preparations ahead of time. Your husband may not be aware that every time you go to the grocery store, each item that you put into your cart is 50 cents or $1 more, but you're the primary shopper in your home and you see it and you know that the inflation is real and happening and affecting your household, so you have to act on it. Sober-minded women watch the times and the seasons, and they aren't caught unaware. We watch and we act wisely. And in the process of our preparedness, just like Noah, we prepare for the saving of our households. By our diligence, as it's mentioned in Proverbs chapter 27, is there sufficiency for our whole households. And in Proverbs 31, all her household is clothed with double garments because of her preparations. We have such an important responsibility as women. And I don't mean to make preparedness out as something that we do just for hard times. In fact, no, preparedness should be a lifestyle. For me, it is very much a lifestyle. It just makes more economical sense for me to buy 50 pounds of beans for $26 than 1 pound for $1.75. From a convenience standpoint, it is so convenient to have my own store, if you will, at home. I'm not having to constantly go out and buy groceries. I have it all there. Helps me to be more hospitable, invite people over for dinner because I've got enough for all of us. And also, it's so convenient when I know how to can my own beans and can my own meat, and they're just there for when I need to throw together a meal at the last minute. You know, it's just part of your life. You know, I'm thinking about school supplies before the school supply sales happen, so that when they happen, I know what I need and I can get those supplies at a great price. Preparedness is just part of my life. It's the way that I live my life, and that's what I want to encourage it to be for you as well. Preparedness isn't just about, you know, preparing ahead of time for those tough times ahead, but about enhancing the good times by managing our time and our resources well. Preparedness, I believe, is a biblical value. It's not about fearfulness, but it's about faith. It's not about paranoia, but it's about sobriety and soundness of mind. It's not about hoarding a bunch of stuff at one time, things that you may not ever even use, but you just feel safer because you have them. It's about living a lifestyle. And it's not about selfishness, but it's about having our families and our community's best interests at the forefront of our minds. We are repeatedly encouraged in the scriptures to live a lifestyle of preparedness. Proverbs especially admonishes the sluggard and prophesies blessings for the diligent. There's a proverb that says, the fool sees and disregards the danger ahead of him, and he perishes for it. But the wise see the danger, and they respond appropriately with action. Will we be like the foolish, or will we be like the wise? I, for one, want to be the wise. I want to be the prepared woman that looks ahead before my time of need. And I want to encourage you to also live a lifestyle of preparedness out of faith, out of humility, and out of wisdom. And so I'm going to share with you 5 practical ways, 5 tips that you can get started with preparedness if you want to today, and it's tomorrow, so I have changed clothes. My hair may look a little different. I ran out of time yesterday to finish, and in any case, my phone battery was too low to continue recording. So here we are today, and this is actually a great time to be able to give a disclaimer here to simply say that preparedness can look many different ways depending on your context, you know, what your goals are. Some people may want to save up and store a year's worth of food, whereas other people may have the goal of producing their own food. Some people may live in an apartment, and their preparedness could look different from someone who's living on a farm or who has, you know, multiple rooms in their house that they can store food in. So preparedness can look many different ways, and obviously all of these tips that I share are informed by my own experience and my own interests and my own goals. But I hope that each one of these will be applicable to you in whatever context you find yourself in and will still be helpful for you. So let's get into tip number 1, which is the most important tip, and that is to follow the Lord's promptings. I know that sometimes when you're just starting out preparing, it can be a little overwhelming. You don't know where to start. There's just so many areas of preparation to consider. But if Yahweh's word encourages us to live a lifestyle of preparedness, then we can trust Him to lead us and to guide us in bite-sized chunks and in steps that are manageable for us to take. So I encourage you to seek the Lord fervently for His wisdom of where to begin, and then follow His promptings. So that may mean that there's a thought that's reoccurring in your mind. You're constantly thinking, I need to get some food storage in place. And it's showing up in things you're reading, it's showing up in videos, and just for whatever reason, these conversations are coming out of the blue about food storage, and you just keep thinking, I need to get some food storage. Or maybe it's putting together a medical kit that keeps reoccurring in your mind. Follow that prompting. It could very well be that gentle guidance that the Lord often gives us. Or maybe there is an opportunity that's presenting itself to you just out of the blue. Maybe there's a friend who's about to can some produce, or she's about to ferment some things, and she says, hey, yeah, I'd be very willing to show you how to do it too. Take her up on that opportunity. Or there's a group of friends that want to go in and buy some bulk dry goods together that you could use to put back in your food storage. Take these opportunities that are just right there in front of you, that are relevant to you and to your family, because it very well could be Yahweh prompting you, putting people and conversations and thoughts in your mind for you to know what step to take next. I know that is really the way it started for my husband and I. We didn't have any revelation moment where we suddenly transitioned from not preparing to preparing. It was just very gradual that I believe the Lord would place people and conversations and experiences and whatnot in our path that would lead us into the next step of preparedness, so that as we walked and we continued following those promptings, we would just go further and further into preparedness. So you can trust in Yahweh. If His word is going to encourage us to live a lifestyle of preparedness, He will also equip us to do so. My second tip is to prepare for the little things. You don't have to prepare for the end of the world and all these calamities that could happen, you know, government shutdown, EMPs, total society collapse. You're gonna drive yourself crazy if you think in those terms, and you probably won't make much preparedness headway in any case. So instead, I would encourage you to think of preparedness in terms of a power outage that lasts just 3 days. Suppose a windstorm comes through and the power is knocked out in your community for just 3 days. The grocery stores, the gasoline stations, your own home, all depending on electricity. What would be affected in your daily routine? What would you want to have on hand in your home for that type of situation? And you can just think through this scenario. Maybe then also you can think about a job loss, which is very possible for any of us, that lasts 6 months. And just preparing for those two scenarios, a power outage that lasts 3 days and a job loss that lasts 6 months, is going to prepare you for the majority of things that could be ahead. We can become paralyzed if we focus on all the possible scenarios that there are to prepare for, but I want to encourage you that there's actually great overlap between the minor issues and the major ones. So think about what is relevant to you and your family. Maybe you live in an area with frequent hurricanes, or that has rolling blackouts, or maybe you live in an area that's more prone to flooding. Perhaps your husband is your sole provider of income in your family. What if he lost his job? So you want to start with these small scenarios, that are actually relevant to you, that are likely in your context, and break your preparations up into manageable chunks this way. In Idaho, where we moved from a year ago, we regularly would have windstorms come through and occasionally a snowstorm that would cause a power outage to last a day or two. I think the longest was like 32 hours. And so I thought through, what would I need? And so I came up with this 3-day food emergency kit that didn't require me to heat anything up. Now, if it was winter, I did have my wood stove, but a lot of times our power went out like in August. That was usually the time when we lost power. And so I had things like dehydrated soups where you just add water, oats where you just add water, canned meats that are already cooked and you can just eat them from the can, Lara bars, teas, nut mix snacks, you know, things like that. But even though this is just a little thing, it's just 3 days of preparations of food for my family, by preparing for this little 3-day outage, I'm actually making preparations for a major outage as well. My mind is going through this process of what would be affected and what I would want to have on hand. Then I have my working pantry storage, which is where I store, you know, all the groceries that I buy, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, any canned goods, things that are in my refrigerator, things that are in my freezer, my dried goods in my buckets, you know, the things that I'm regularly taking from and adding to as often as I get them from the store or from my garden or from harvesting chickens and whatnot. And my goal with my working pantry is to have 3 months worth of groceries on hand at all times. It actually started, my working pantry started with me trying to have at least 1 month's worth of food on the shelf at all times. And that was really, again, more about preparedness as a lifestyle. And so I changed my shopping habits. I went from buying groceries at the store like every other day when it was just my husband and I were living in the city, to kind of stretching that out to once a week I would go grocery shopping, then once every other week, and then I built that up to grocery shopping, you know, just once a month. You know, it didn't make sense for me to go to the grocery store every day anymore when I lived an hour and a half from my grocery store of choice. You know, if I had forgotten something, I couldn't just run to town real quick, get what I needed and come back. I needed to be prepared with what I had on hand. And so that's where I kind of started shopping about once a month. And you know, you learn some nuances when you start to stretch yourself in those ways. Like, for example, I would have all the tender vegetables and fruits at the beginning of the month, and then save the potatoes, the carrots, the onions, the garlic, the things that last longer, apples, pears, for later in the month, so that I was having fresh produce all month long. It's just a difference of what type of produce. And so that's where my pantry started, was just the goal of having 1 month's worth of groceries on hand. And then my husband started working with a electrical union, and he was consistently laid off seasonally November, December, and January, pretty much every year, like except for 1 year that was pretty mild. But usually I could count on him being laid off November, December, and January. And so I wanted to be able to ease the grocery budget when we wouldn't have income coming in those 3 months. So I started doing a 3-month working pantry where I always have 3 months worth of groceries at one time in my working pantry. Like I said, of course, those fresh fruits and vegetables are going to be in that first month, and then it's going to be more of the canned and the fermented and the dehydrated and the frozen fruits and vegetables later on. But at least 3 months worth of groceries, so that it would see us through those times when my husband would be laid off every single year for those 3 months in winter. And if we really had to stretch it, it probably could last us longer. If we were to ration ourselves and not eat normally as we do now, it could probably last us a little longer, but 3 months is my goal. 3 months of comfortable eating for my family is my goal for my working pantry, and it's worked out really well for us. Like I said, you can't possibly prepare for every single little scenario that could happen, but a lot of the scenarios that can happen have overlap with all these other scenarios. We have used our working pantry as our sole source of food for like 4 to 6 months in the past, because we had something come up that we wanted to save money for, or we needed to cut our grocery budget back for some reason or another, or had to completely eliminate it for a while. We had that working pantry there. So it's kind of funny, because you think you're planning on preparing for one thing, but then it ends up being such a blessing for this other unexpected thing that has come up. Good and bad unexpected things. Like I said, there was once when we wanted to save up money for something very good and wonderful, wonderful. And the only wiggle room in our budget was our grocery budget. But here I have 3 months worth of groceries on the shelf. So I just cut out the grocery budget and we ate off of our working pantry those 4 months, actually. I think it was 4 or 5 months without any grocery budget. We ate comfortably and it was great. So again, preparing for these little things like a job loss for 3 months or 6 months or a power outage for 3 days is going to prepare you for so much more. I would encourage you to start with these little things, these little scenarios. Start with the pantry that you probably already have started to some extent. What do you have in there? How many meals could you make for your family? How could you bolster this pantry to be able to provide for your family a whole week's worth of food, or 2 weeks, or a month's worth of food? Also, part of preparedness is organization. You know, if we can organize what we have, it can help us to know where we're strong and where we're lacking and give us some direction for going forward and what steps we need to take next. So in our family, we have our 3-day emergency food supply, we have our working pantry, and then I have our long-term food storage, which thankfully I have not had to touch, although that doesn't necessarily mean that everything there is the original stuff. I do rotate through. Stuff that's in my long-term storage goes into my working pantry and gets replaced with new stuff in the long-term storage, and just I keep rotating through it all. But the long-term storage is not a lot of fun stuff. It's basically just dried goods, basics like beans and rice, salt, baking soda, you know, like your essentials. So it's not luxurious eating, but it would certainly sustain us if we ever needed it. And my long-term food storage is actually where I got started with preparedness, surprisingly enough. It seems like the most ambiguous one, but it's where I started because of this next tip. Tip number 3, which is to pursue peace and soundness of mind. When I realized the importance of having food storage and of preparedness, I felt wholly inadequate with what I had on hand and with where I was in preparedness. And a lot of people say, you know, start with the 3-day food supply kit. But when I compared 3 days worth of food to how inadequately prepared I was for anything else, that was not enough for me. I could not get out of my mind, I do not have a way to provide food for my family beyond, you know, this next week. So at our first opportunity, I bought several bags, like bulk bags, 25-pound bags of beans, rice, and salt. And I think that is all. Maybe I did buy baking soda that first round too. And at that time, it cost us just under $100 if I recall correctly. So it wasn't like a huge investment, but just having those bags of bulk food on hand gave me some peace of mind, kind of unlocked my mental space to be able to think about other areas of preparation. So I would just encourage you, if you are feeling so overwhelmed and stuck in preparedness, what's your concern? Pursue peace by addressing that concern first, whatever that concern is, in just the most basic way. Like I said, we just did beans and rice and salt and maybe some baking soda. I can't remember that part, but just the most essential things that we needed to get us by. And that can allow you to have peace of mind, and you'll be able to think through your preparations in a more systematic and thorough way. And I also just want to say, don't think that you have to reach your preparedness goals in just one swoop. I tend to work in more of like a cyclical spiral type fashion where I revisit the same topics over and over again, but on deeper levels and in different ways, you know, different nuanced ways, where I'm constantly revisiting our long-term food storage. I'm constantly revisiting our garden plans and our homeschooling plans, etc. So I would just encourage you, start with the basics, pursue peace, whatever your concern is, pursue peace in that area. Preparedness is a lifestyle, and you can revisit any of these areas as often as you need. Tip number 4 is to simplify life. If you need less in your day-to-day life, then you're going to have less you have to manage and account for in your preparations. So for example, if you have a vanity full of all these skin and hair and hygiene products, and you have a pantry that has all these specialty sauces, if under your sink there are all of these, you know, cleaning products, that's a lot to manage and account for. So instead, you want to minimize your essentials and especially give priority to those items that have multiple uses. And I'm going to tell you my 2 favorite multi-use items right now. They are baking soda and apple cider vinegar. Those 2 are basically the base of all of our hygiene, all of our cleaning. Can be used in the garden, can be used in cooking. Those 2 ingredients can replace a whole host of products, and it really minimizes what I have to account for and what I have to prepare for in my preparations. Castile soap is another multi-use product that you can use in your real life to replace many products. And storing just the Castile soap is so much easier to organize and to manage and to account for than all the products that the Castile soap is replacing. And this goes for herbs too. I know, I love herbs. God has made herbs just so amazing because one herb can address a whole host of illnesses and diseases and skin conditions. And you know, there's just so many uses for every single herb. They are absolutely amazing. I love studying about them. I love using them, but it's really going to be beneficial, at least initially, to pare down your herbs in your home to just those most basic ones that are going to address what your family has need of. I have a video actually about the 10 herbs that I use in my family and how I systematically chose them. I'll link that video in the description box if you're interested. But I know it's difficult. You want to just try out all these different herbs. You've got the forest to go explore around you and you find a new herb here, a new herb there. It can be very tempting to kind of go crazy on the herbs. I totally get it. I'm the same way. But at least initially, to be successful in your preparations and to actually use what you have, you've got to pare down the herbs, you know, the hygiene products, the food variety and the like, pare things down to those essentials and to those basics and to those multi-use items that are relevant to your family. And by simplifying your real life with these more essential and basic things, you also learn how much you need of these items in your preparation. So for example, if you're already making your own toothpaste, then you know how much of each ingredient you need to make a certain quantity, and you know how long that certain quantity is going to last your family. So if I start to use these things in my real life, then I can have a better guess and calculation of how much product I need in my preparation goal. This also goes toward food preparations as well. You know, if I am regularly baking my goods like brownies and biscuits and cakes and cookies and whatnot from scratch, then I'm gonna have a better understanding of how much flour I need to have on hand and in my stores, and the quantity of wheat berries that I would need for my stores in order for me to continue to make those things. As opposed to if I'm buying my brownie mix and I'm buying my biscuit mix and my pancake mix, I'm kind of disconnected from the quantity of flour it actually takes to bake those items. Now within this tip, I'm gonna give you a little bonus tip, which is to make little changes as you begin this lifestyle of preparedness. You don't need to like immediately start making all of your own hygiene products and cooking everything from scratch or buying everything in 50-pound bags all of a sudden. Instead, experiment on a small scale with an ingredient or with a homemade hygiene product or whatnot. If you're going to the store once a week, maybe try stretching out to 2 weeks and then to a month if that's what your end goal is, and just work your way gradually through preparedness. What I'm saying is don't simplify suddenly. Your preparation should match your lifestyle as it is right now, because again, this isn't about hoarding, this is about actually living a lifestyle, and you want to be able to use the things that you put in your stores. So your preparations need to match your lifestyle, but do work toward simplifying things and really prioritizing those things that have multiple uses and that are easier to manage and account for in your preparations. And tip number 5 is my favorite component of preparedness, which is to be continually increasing in knowledge and skills. And I know that I've talked a lot about the supply side and keeping stores on hand in this preparedness video, but having skills is not to be underestimated. You know, we all have different situations and contexts. You may be in a housing situation where you don't have room to store long-term food storage. I live in an RV right now, so I definitely understand limitations on space. This is actually like a glorified storage shed is what I call it, and so I do have long-term food storage on our property, but I understand the small space. You may not be in a place to do that, or a place to have a garden, or to raise animals if that's what your preparedness goals are ultimately, but you can start right now to build your skill set. And it's really fun too, to always be learning and to be providing more for yourself and doing things for yourself. It's just really satisfying, it's really fun. So I would encourage you start with using and preserving foods in their whole states. Instead of buying meat already cut up at the store, you know, chickens, pieces, breasts, legs, wings, leg quarters, that kind of thing at the store, Buy the chicken as a whole chicken and learn how to piece it out yourself. Learn how to make your own bone broth. Instead of buying pasteurized milk at the store, maybe seek out a local farmer who has raw dairy. Raw dairy acts completely different from store-bought dairy. It can become so many different things. So get some raw milk. Learn how to culture it. Learn how to make your own butter, how to make your own kefir and yogurt and sour cream. It's really exciting to do all of these things. And I know I've mentioned it on this channel before, but our homestead grew literally out of my kitchen. As I was needing to do things in the kitchen, needing an ingredient, it's like, why don't we grow this? Or why don't we raise this? We can do this. It was my activities in the kitchen that informed my preparedness activities and my preparedness goals. There are so many skills that are important that you can be learning and practicing right now in whatever your context is that you find yourself. And I have found that the best way to be increasing in knowledge and skills is just to get in there and start trying things out. Make some mistakes, maybe connect with some who have gone before you and done these things before you. Learn from them what you can. But even when you look up recipes online and you watch videos on YouTube of how to, do your own sourdough starter, it is a completely different thing to actually experience it yourself and be like, oh, wait a second. What is this thing doing? That didn't show up on the blog article or on the YouTube video. You have to experience it. You just have to get in there and start doing stuff and learning from that experience. It really doesn't ever get old. It's always exciting. I've been at this for 7.5 years. We've been walking more and more in preparedness, and it's fun, it's satisfying, and it's really important that we be a little bit more self-reliant and be able to do more things for ourselves and live a more prepared lifestyle. So in review, my 5 tips for living a more prepared lifestyle are: 1, follow the Lord's prompting. Start with the things that are right there in front of you. He won't lead you wrong. 2, prepare for the little things, not the end of the world scenarios. 3, pursue peace. If there's an area that's particularly causing you worry and concern, address that concern in the most basic way so your mind can be free of worry and you can have more clarity in your preparations. 4, simplify life, and with that, make small changes. Don't simplify suddenly. And 5, always be increasing in learning and knowledge and skills. I hope these 5 tips will help you to get started on your lifestyle of preparedness as a biblical value and as an expression of our faith in God, of humility and of wisdom for the best interest of our families and our communities and our households. And if you have any additional tips that you would like to share, let us know in the comments below what you would advise for getting started with living a lifestyle of preparedness. Now, after 7.5 years of living a more prepared lifestyle, what are the areas that I particularly focus on in my preparations that I'm constantly thinking about as a homemaker and as a mama? There are 4 areas that I think about all the time that I'm constantly revisiting, and I'm gonna share those with you briefly. The first area that I constantly focus on is food and water. Of course, this is our most basic sustenance, and this looks like food storage for us, and then also being able to produce as much of our own food as possible. So we have a little farm going, we have a 1/4-acre garden, then we have laying hens, meat chickens, ducks, geese, and sheep. And then of course we need manual kitchen tools to be able to process all of this food, even in an off-grid situation. The area of food and water is just constantly on my mind because it requires the most effort, and also it's the one that's most transient. We're consuming food, and so we've got to replace that food. So I'm constantly thinking about food and water for my family. The second area I think about a lot are medical preparations. And I lump the herbal and natural remedies in with the medical supplies like bandages and cloth tape into this category. Now, thankfully, my children aren't sick very often, and we don't really have any wound type things happening very often. But when we need our medical preparations, we need a lot of it. When my kids are sick, I have tons of herbal tea going into their bodies. So we're consuming a lot of that storage in just one day or 1 week of sickness. When my husband hit his head with a T-post pounder, and when my daughter burned her arm and her palm, we went through a lot of medical supplies in the time that it took for those wounds to heal. So Thankfully, praise Yahweh, we do not need these supplies very often, but when we do, we need them in large quantities. So I'm always thinking about, do I have enough of this item for like daily dressing changes or for a week long of sickness, etc. The third area that I focus on a lot in my preparations are hygiene products and ingredients, especially oral and dental care, because I truly believe that a lot of the things happening in our mouth affect whole other areas of our body. So floss is probably my #1 preparation in the hygiene department, but then I also have things like hairbrushes and soap and razors and things of that nature in my preparations as well. And finally, the fourth area that I'm always thinking about as a homemaker and mama are homeschooling preparations. Maybe I'm just a dork, maybe I'm the only one who's like looking ahead years down the road for my kids, but I do make provisions for my children's homeschool, and this includes supplies like pencils and paper and scissors, but it especially includes books. Books. I would just love to have ceiling to floor, wall to wall of books. That would be bliss. And I buy most of our books secondhand, and what I'm looking for are quality literature, reference materials, and even curriculum that I have researched thoroughly and that I've used, I have experience with them, I like them. I'm looking for all of those for not just now and what my daughter can read now, but what she can read in the years to come. I want to be able to give them a rich education, even if I can't get to the library anymore. And I share this about the curriculum stores very cautiously because I don't want to encourage everyone to just go out and immediately buy K through 12 of all the curriculum they ever think they might need or might want, especially if you are not yet homeschooling or you just started homeschooling, or even if it's likely that you would want to switch curriculum from year to year. I know myself, I know my philosophy on education and the role that I am willing to take as a parent in my children's education, and I know the risks that I'm taking in buying curriculum for years ahead. And so I make my purchases very cautiously, and so I want to also caution you to be cautious and not just go out and to buy a whole bunch of curriculum. Even if you like it today, it's possible you may not like it next year, and so just to be wise and to use discernment with that. But I would be amiss to not share that I do stock up on homeschooling preparations. That's a very big part of my preparations as a mother and as a homeschooling mama, so that's why I'm sharing with you. But just be cautious, use discernment, use discretion, follow the Lord's prompting, and He will lead you in the right way. If you are living a lifestyle of preparedness to any degree, I would love to hear what you're working on, what you're thinking about, what that looks like in your life. Share with us all in the comments below. And now to one of my favorite parts of this video, photographs from you of different ways that you are living a lifestyle of preparedness. Guys, my phone died again, but this time came prepared, and I have a battery pack here that I can plug my phone into. So we are back in business, and we can get onto your pictures that you sent in of different ways that you are living a prepared lifestyle. And we're starting with a picture sent in by Carrie. Carrie has this beautiful loaf of bread. It looks so good, and a very beautiful picture. She says, "This is a picture of bread I made recently, from wheat berry to flour, then bread." Very cool. Food is the most important item to prepare, in my opinion, specifically knowing how to make food from the most basic ingredients. Yes, I definitely agree. And I asked her what grain mill she uses, and she says that she uses a grain mill attachment for her KitchenAid stand mixer to grind her flour. So that's really neat. I don't have any experience with that, but I will link the manual grain mill that I use and highly recommend in the description box. Then Carrie says, "I'm also learning as much as I can about herbal medicine, specifically to meet the needs of my family. Another important item is hygiene supplies." Yes, I am just that. Yes, hygiene supplies, so important. In the event that we are unable to access shampoo and soap from the market, knowing how to wash your hair and body with natural items and having access to these items is essential. Personally, I wash my hair with eggs collected from my chickens and will be planting soapwort to use in place of soap soon. And then she adds, "I'm sure that last part makes me sound a little crazy, but I believe what Yahweh gave us is perfect. We don't need man-made chemicals to replace the natural things He has given us." And as I responded to her in the email, I don't think she's crazy at all. It makes total sense to me. I'm in complete agreement. And just thank you so much, Carrie, for sharing this information, your thoughts on preparedness, and this picture of your gorgeous loaf of bread with us. If you want to share your recipe and your method of making this bread in the comments below, I'm sure all of us would greatly appreciate it. So thank you so much, Carrie, for sending your picture in. Your bread looks really good. Our next two pictures come from Amani, who has been a dear friend, a virtual friend of mine on this channel for such a long time. I'm so grateful that you sent in pictures. She says that this is a small apartment room turned a prepper pantry, which is just phenomenal what you're doing in such a small space. And she writes, I like Mary's Nest, Prepper Pantry, Working Pantry, etc., which Mary's Nest is a YouTube channel that you should check out. We have extra cabinets in our kitchen that house pasta, tomato products, canned fish, fruit, and veggies. She goes on to say, I have a smaller closet that I use as my working pantry. We only have space for a small garden, so we cannot preserve much. Our goals are to get a large freezer so we can buy bulk meat, and we need more water storage. Their dream is to have a homestead. And my friend, you are just rocking the space that Yahweh has provided for you, and I pray that He will bless your diligence and your efforts with the desires of your heart, with your dream homestead in His time and according to His will. And let me just say that your organization in this picture really inspired me. I then went, when I had an opportunity, and I reorganized my pantry as well. It looks so much better, it's so much more functional, so thank you for inspiring me to do that. And just keep up the faithfulness and the diligence. This is really cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Next, we have a picture from Tamara, who sent in this picture of water glassing eggs. Honestly, I have never tried preserving eggs in this way before. It's kind of just like in our home, feast or famine when it comes to eggs. If the chickens are laying, we're eating lots of eggs, and if they're not laying, then we're not eating eggs. I don't really have a great way to preserve eggs. If you have a really great way to preserve eggs, I would love to know in the comments what method you use. Water glassing, I've heard a lot of great things about. So thank you for sending in this picture. This is really cool to see what you guys are doing. And finally, we have 6 pictures from Magen, and there's lots to note here. She didn't send any words with her pictures, but pictures are worth 1,000 words, and there's lots of notable points. I like her use first system so that she can rotate through her stock. She's also got some homemade beef jerky, which is so yummy. She has a picture of canned milk, which is definitely a valid option. If you have an abundance of milk, it's better to preserve it the way that you know than to waste it. Again, with the gamma lids on the buckets like Amani had, and I have those too. I highly recommend them. I really love them. I can put a link to the gamma lids that I use in the description box. One of her buckets is labeled dog, and yes, we don't want to forget about our pets and our animals when we're preparing. And then it appears that inside some of the buckets she has vacuum packed smaller quantities of grains, which is a really great way if you're not regularly going through 5-gallon buckets of grain. Then you can vacuum pack them into smaller packages, open up the bucket, take out the small quantity, use that, you know, and you're not, you're just keeping everything fresh for longer. So yeah, these are all wonderful examples of living a life of preparedness. And thank you so much for hanging out with me today to talk about preparedness as a biblical lifestyle and a biblical value, and to share some practical tips to get started with preparedness. I truly appreciate each one of you. Thank you to those of you who sent in pictures and collaborated with me and shared. It really is exciting to see what you guys are doing and to be able to share that with others in our community of godly women. I hope you were blessed by this video. Please give it a thumbs up, share it with other godly ladies in your life, subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, I pray that Yahweh would bless you and keep you. I'll talk with you later. Bye-bye.